It's Sports Bazaar.
Welcome aboard, everyone.
Anyone isn't happy, we call it all off immediately.
The hunt for the weirdest.
There you go. Can you put out a fact sheet with this?
You blowed my mind.
I can't keep up.
Strangest.
Catastrophic, amazing, bizarre. Multiple layers of stupidity coming together.
What could go wrong?
Most unbelievable.
It's like a Coen Brothers movie.
Stories to ever occur.
They're only going to get weirder from here.
Get comfy, everyone.
Some good, some bad, and some just bizarre, which we love.
In the world of sport.
How many chimneys could you do in a day?
I've researched the Tour de France, not chimney sweeps.
Sports Bazaar.
Right, police are called in.
What, for the players?
Dennis Rodman is telling you to calm down. Testicle soup.
Can I just stop you for a second?
Don't act like you've never done this. I feel like once again we've strayed away from what I've researched.
It's time for the leaders of the hunt.
An old couple who've got our spark back.
It's Titus O'Reilly and Mick Molloy.
Welcome to the latest edition of Sports Bazaar with my good self, Mick Molloy, and of course Titus O'Reilly. What are you bringing to the table this week?
Well, Mick, it's in our part of the world, Melbourne, where we record this,
Yes.
in Australia, if people don't know,
Sure.
it's spring carnival time.
One of the great sporting carnivals in the world, bar none.
Massive.
as far as
Like
I'm
racing
concerned.
in Victoria has always been huge. Mark Twain came to the Melbourne Cup and said it was like something he'd never seen before. It was like, so
Yeah.
it's always had this big pull. And so we're recording this just before Caulfield Cup.
Yes.
And then there's a series about 4 massive days of racing at Flemington, and then there's it's
Including
right
the
in
famous
middle of
Melbourne
it.
Cup, which is anywhere around the world. If you follow racing, you know what
Huge.
we're talking about.
So I thought, well, let's do a racing story to,
Sure.
get this, because if there's one sport that gives no shortage of bizarre moments,
Of colourful characters.
colourful games, and this guy might be the most colourful.
Here we go.
That's a big claim.
That's a huge claim.
So we're talking about a guy. His name is Robert Standish Sievier. So
Okay.
that's his name, and often called Bob Siva.
Okay.
And so Bob was born in London 1860, and his dad his grandfather had been this very renowned figure. He'd been in the Royal Society for Science and scientific discoveries. This is in the era
Like an
of
explorers club or
yeah,
something.
sort of the Victorian gentleman sort of scientist. He was one of them, really
Gotcha.
renowned. His Bob's dad, though, literally didn't work or do anything. Did nothing.
So he's from the aristocratic
They've got
class.
an aristocratic background, but then his dad does nothing. His dad dies when he's 5, and so he's left to be raised by his mother. And it was a very loose upbringing. He ends up going to school in France for a bit. He bounces around. He doesn't really do anything that exciting.
Yeah.
But he starts to he's a bit of an adventurous lad. He's got great gift of the gab.
Right.
Loves to tell a story, even as a young kid. And he's incredibly good looking. So everyone's charmed by him. He's like, from a young kid, this thing in all of this story,
He's gonna
is
go all right.
everyone says this guy is like the most, just people wanted to hang out with him and loved him. His charisma's through the charts. So about this time when he turns sort of 16, he's sort of had a loose upbringing, moved around a lot, no parental figure. And a friend of him, at this time, England's recruiting people for the Frontier Armed and Mounted Police of South Africa.
Okay.
So this is like before the build up to the Boer Wars.
Pre-Boer
War. This is when there was a bunch of African tribes. So this was the Kafir, Zulu and Basuto Wars.
Yes.
Which is really where a bunch of Africans thought Africa belonged to them, not
How
the
dare
English.
they?
Yeah,
How
it was
dare
a
they?
crazy notion
a bit
that they
uppity.
had. Yeah, and it was literally like this was recruiting, like it was colonial police that would go out and stop, raids and keep basically the general populace suppressed.
Sure.
So he's about his friend of his, Thomas Bosby. He says, I've enlisted into this. You should come. He's 16 years old,
Are
right?
they all of similar type? Is this
Yeah,
something
these are-
that the
these are-
upper
it's the upper class
classes go
sort of-
to South Africa
Well, it's
and
sort of like if you're
it's a reign of terror?
if you're really rich and you're the son about to inherit it, you don't go. It
Right.
tends to be the third, fourth sons, or the ones that maybe are like him. His dad didn't do much.
We can spare that one.
He's got he's not going to make it on anything else.
He's kind of Prince Edward.
He's exactly.
You can go. Not you.
In fact, we're keen to send you to a war. Well, it's like Prince Harry. They sent Prince Harry
There
to the
you
war.
go. Sure.
You're just you're not the heir, you're the spare.
Not the top guy.
Yeah, you're not the top guy. You never want to be that. So he finds out his friend Busby is enlisted. He says, I've enlisted another friend of theirs, but a guy, and it just gives his name. Bloxham is his name, his surname. We don't have a first name for him. He's going as well, and they're sitting chatting to him, and Bloxham says, "I'm getting cold feet of going." And his mother is furious that he's going.
Why has he got cold feet? Is it dangerous?
It can be. I mean, you could get hit by a spear while you're shooting someone with a gun. I mean, you're massively out. But no, it is like people will die. Like it's a war. It's just
Now all I'm seeing is Michael Caine in Zulu.
yeah. Well, this is the era, right?
This is what we're talking
This
about.
is what we're talking about.
Did you know 10,000 Zulus will be coming over? That's
Yeah.
by Michael Caine, by the way.
It's good.
Was it all right?
It was actually way better than I had any right to be.
I can do any voice you want. Just ask.
You're,
Throw
the
it.
you're a man of 1,000 voices.
All right, let's go. So
he's
who's
that
got
rabbit.
cold feet?
So Bloxham's got cold feet, and they're sitting around
Bloxham.
And he's sitting around one night, and Siva's 16 years old, right? These are young guys. And the mum's like beside herself bawling, and Bloxham's like, I can't get out of this. And Siva says, you know what? I'll go in your stead. Don't worry. Leave it with me. He goes,
Steps up.
How can I do? And Bloxham's like, how can you do that? Like I've gone to the recruiting thing. He goes, just leave it with me. And this is the sort of guy he is, right? So Siva rocks into the next day to the recruitment officer. It's like full army recruiting soldiers and everything. He walks in and he says, look, when I signed up the other day, I gave a fake name of Bloxham because I thought I might get cold feet. And I just wanted to come in and say, my real name's Siva, and I'm all in.
I'm good to go.
And the recruiting officer goes, this shows great courage and moral fibre on your behalf.
You are exactly what we're looking for.
It took a lot of guts to come in here and admit to your mistake. Now, it's a total lie, right?
Yeah.
And this is where he's written.
They like the cut of his jib.
They like the cover.
We like you, Siva.
And Siva he's written, you can go and Google this, it's free online. He actually wrote several books, but one of them is his autobiography.
Okay.
One of the most unreliable documents in history.
Has it
But
been fact-checked?
It is. I fact-checked bits of it, and it is so far up, but it is a rollicking read. Like, it's of its time. There's racism all through it.
Okay.
There's all these amazing bits all through it, but he writes with real like panache, and it's
A bit self-serving?
It's totally self-serving, but it's like sort of this boy's adventure.
It's a
kind
cracking
of
read.
It's a cracking read.
Yeah.
Like it goes through all this, and he wrote about this thing. He says this was the first going to this recruitment officer was the first big lie I'd ever told.
Yes.
But he
soon got the taste for it.
well, he got the taste for it, but he also said we all have our own definitions. His writing, we all have our own definition of a lie. Mine is that it is a false statement which does someone harm. But where no ill is done and good results, then it is no lie. Good cannot come out of a lie. Hence, when good grows, a lie could not have been sown.
Wow.
Now, you'll find he
By
often
definition,
lies, and by his own definition, good does not.
Does not
That's
count.
what he says, right? His
So it's
book-
only a lie if it causes
yeah.
trouble in the universe.
Yeah. So his biography, though, which was written, this is my favourite in his biography, it was written like in sort of 1910s around that time, so quite a bit up this. But he says of his time in the South African regiments, he says he prints a couple in his autobiography of the story, sings the marching songs they sung.
Right.
And one of them's about like some woman who gets into an affair with someone, and the bad language is she had Humpty Dumpty with him. That's the bad, and he writes underneath.
Well,
and this is in like
scandalous.
1910. He writes, "Of course, I can't say that. You can't sing those songs anymore because the world's changed and everyone will get angry with you." And he's like literally complaining about being cancelled in 1910.
The very first example of wokeness. You can't use
What
the
just
phrase
shows you-
Humpty Dumpty. What was that?
It's like Humpty Dumpty do. And he goes, and then he says, I think the reason you can't say these things anymore is because women now all work. And this is 1910.
PC madness.
It just hasn't changed. So there's a whole paragraph on it. It's fantastic. So anyway,
I was really hoping you were going to sing it to me in the style.
I should have bought it. So on September 22nd, 1876, he sails over to the Cape of Good Hope, and on the boat to South Africa, he loses all his money playing cards. absolutely everything.
I like this guy.
He says, by the time we reached Cape Town, my silver watch and telescope had gone in a raffle, the ladder being twice put up, I having won it the first time. So he kept putting things into the raffle. He's playing cards, he's doing everything. He gets along with everyone. Everyone loves him. He loses all his money. By the time he lands, he's got $0, £0, no money.
Okay.
And he's lost all he's given away like his watch, his telescope,
Pretty much turning up in his underpants.
Yeah, pretty much. And so he gets there, and when they arrive, he's made 4 just friends on the journey. He arrived and they're like, what are we going to do? We've got no money. And between them all, he having none, they had about £4 on them, which is not a lot. So he says, well, let's go to the best hotel in Cape Town. Which is not what you
the
say.
only logical thing to do,
Logical
mate.
thing. It was called the Royal, and upon arriving, they entered the billiard room, and Siva says,
I'm on to him now.
just act like you're here. Just act like we belong here.
Yeah.
And his friends are like, wow, he just walks in like, I own the joint, right?
Sure.
Starts chatting to people, making some friends. Lo and behold, they find out that people are betting on games of pool. And so he says, give me your
Give me the £4.
He gets it. And he starts playing and he starts winning.
Yeah.
Wins a huge amount of money and wins enough to fund the whole huge night out. They win a whole lot of money. Instead of like keeping some, they spend it all that night.
Fair call.
In a thing. So he says, this is what he actually said. He said, we left the smoking room. You would have just, this is for you, this era.
I love it.
Right. We left the smoking room of the Royal Hotel Merry Men. We spent the evening at the theatre, and after various exploits, which I need not graphically described, returned to the ship
Bit of Humpty
somewhat
Dumpty
late.
do, I reckon.
Humpty Dumpty.
Return to the ship late.
Late, so they're absolutely hungover. They do the same the next night and make even more money and have an even bigger night.
I love this.
So this is what he's like. Then the fun in Cape Town's over. He's shipped off to the headquarters of the fronted armed and mounted
they
police.
even do any work in Cape Town?
No, that was a stopover because
It was
they were
like
just outside of Cape Town. So think of Cape
like
Town
sailors on shore leave.
Yeah, Cape Town's like, what they control, and then they're pushing out into various bits of South Africa where there's the local tribes, and then there's also the Boers over there, the Dutch and farmers and that. So there's all these sort of things happening out there. So he's heading out onto the frontier basically, and he heads out there, and he says our job was just to keep down native raids. So he says the local tribes would try and steal cattle and do all this sort of stuff. So it was literally a bit like the Wild West in America, where they were trying to suppress these people, and his job was patrol. He says it was completely boring and he hated it, right?
Okay.
Because the excitement's there for the first minute, and then he's like, well, this sucks. So he gets transferred because he actually gets promoted to the rank of corporal. He goes this tiny one.
What did he do to get promoted?
I think everyone likes him. Every bit of this book and
Siva's
stories, they all he's good fun. He drinks, he smokes, he gambles. He's great with the ladies, apparently.
You want him on your team?
You want him on your team. You'd never want to lend him money.
Okay.
We'll just foreshadow. So he gets moved to this tiny town called Dordrecht, which he makes new friends in this town as corporal with the magistrate and a Dr. Foster, who's the medical practitioner from the area. Right. And they play pool every afternoon at a small hotel.
For money.
But Siva's so bored, he starts complaining to Dr. Foster about how boring it is being in the army.
He's got a low boredom threshold, this bloke. He needs action.
These days he'd be ADHD in 2 seconds. Like, you know, everyone now has ADHD.
Yeah.
He would have been right up there. So he's bored and he's just playing pool. And he says, it's incredibly lazy work, but I'm bored. But even the incredibly lazy work is more work that I really like doing.
Okay.
So that's his... So the doctor says, well, I'll write you an honourable discharge and you come and be my assistant.
What?
So he says, yeah, sure, I'll do that.
What a scam.
Yeah, so he says, compared with the arduous, if brief work I'd done in the force, this fresh life was an indolent, if not a luxurious one. So he's just sitting around in this city.
How long has he been? So he's been in the force for?
Yeah, he's only been out there for about 6 months at this point, right? Like he's not. It's not like he's been around for years, right?
Unbelievable.
He gets bored of even this, of hanging around with the doctor. And leaves.
What type of doctor was he?
He was just a medical practitioner, so he was just like these days. This is probably like
leeches and stuff like that.
Probably leeches. Probably monkey testicle injection.
Monkey testicles.
It's all
bit of
that.
electrocution.
Yeah. So anyway, he gets bored and takes off to another town, Rouville. He finds work teaching English to a Dutch family. A person he meets in Rouville says to him, "Are you looking for work?" He says, "Not really." And they say, "There's a Dutch family that wants someone to teach their kids English, and they'll pay a lot of money." And he was like, "Great." So he says,
Can he speak
"Okay,
Dutch?
I'll go." No, but he's just going to teach him English, right? He doesn't speak Dutch at all. So he says, "All right, I'll do that." He speaks French, but he goes, "I'll do that." So he goes there and he finds out when he shows there that the daughters of the family aren't kids; they're 20, right?
Okay, there's trouble brewing here.
Yeah. So he says, "Oh, okay," and so. He then starts a love affair with the 20-year-old daughter. Of
course he
says
does.
the study soon developed, this is his words in his book, the study soon developed into a rendezvous on the banks of the Orange River, and finding the young lady a most apt pupil, I can say without fear of contradiction that she was thoroughly acquainted with English in a very short time.
What is the Dutch word for Humpty Dumpty Doo?
This is his whole book, just things like that, you know.
So he's away.
He's away. He then figures it's getting a bit. The heat's getting a bit big in this Dutch
Would that
family.
be scandalous for the
Yeah.
time?
So it's luckily for him, just as it's getting a bit like wherever he is, it always gets a bit.
I can see this guy jumping out of windows with his trousers in one
he's
hand,
that
kind of
guy,
stuff.
yeah.
Is that it?
And then war sort of breaks out again between some of the tribes. So he raises a volunteer army and goes and fights in one of the major battles.
Well, hang
there.
on, how does he do that? So
He
it's
just
like
goes
he gets
to
a
a
lynch,
local
like
town.
a lynch mob.
You got to remember, he's 16, 17 now, and he goes to the local town, and they're all the
Who's with
English
me?
people living there. And he says, you know, the local tribe are all raiding, so he says
We
we got to
need to-
fight back. So he raises an army and goes and marches them, and it's just that. I mean, it's a.
Is he in charge?
Yeah, he's in charge. He's 16. He's in charge because he'd been in the army for like 5 minutes. He says, "Yeah,
I was a colonel."
Yeah. So he marches them up, and they
Corporal.
get involved in a battle where they basically charge on their horses and
Great.
all that. He talks up like you're reading his biography. They won the battle. He won the battle for them. But so he does all this, and it is all going well. But then he decides after that takes him up to 18 months in South Africa.
Sure.
He decides, well, I've had enough of this. I'm going home.
Bored again.
I'm bored. So he goes back to London. On the trip back to London, he wins a whole heap of money and loses it all. So arrives back to London broke. Stone cold broke again. So he begins to just slowly starts gambling on cards and starts to get into horse racing, a little bit of gambling.
Right.
And at one stage he wins.
Is this a problem for him?
Massive problem, right? Like, well, I don't think it was for him. He's one of those guys that makes money, loses. Money comes and goes, and he just...
But there's no one there saying gamble responsibly.
I don't think there's no one to call in these days.
No.
So he wins £3,000 on the Manchester Cup, which is a huge amount of money.
Oh, my God.
Loses it straight away. Straight away loses it, right? He's so loved by all the people taking the bookies because
Yes.
they just see him coming. He's got the worst luck, right? He then decides, well, you know what I'll do? I'll become an actor. So he starts acting. He starts playing in Dublin, London, and Bombay.
Any good?
Well, he was okay, I think. He wrote several plays as well and things like that. So he was a real Renaissance man. But he goes to India and he's in Bombay to do some acting. He gets in such debt that he had to flee the country because money lenders are after him. And not money lenders like, we're going to tell you off, like to kill him.
Right.
And so he has to stow away in a London-bound steamer to escape.
This is a great story.
And he's literally in.
You got me. I'm in.
He's in the bit where he's in the chimney or whatever of the steamer to hide, and comes out covered in soot.
Bit of blackface.
Yes, well before. And that's how he gets back to London on that.
Well, why was he going to India for acting? I didn't think India was
He's
they
kind
already
of
had a kind of Bollywood style industry
Well, I think
going.
it was
or-
because the English were running India, so it was going
Of
before
course.
for all the colonial authorities and stuff.
course.
But he
yeah, the top end of town.
Yeah.
They want some theatre.
They want some theatre. And he
I'll
did
roll in.
Shakespeare and all that sort of stuff. And then he always,
Course.
though, he loves adventure, right? Like, this isn't a guy that sits still. So if someone says, do you want to come to India? He's
He
like,
doesn't think it through.
well, also, wherever he's in any place for any period of time, it pretty quickly becomes clear it's time for him to move on from that place. And we'll get into some of why. So
Yeah.
he then gets it. So it's 1881, May 30. He says, this was the day where he decides, I'm going to get out of acting. I've had enough of acting. And I'm going to focus my life, because it's been such a success so far, on racing and gambling.
Right.
Because this is what he says.
He dabbles in a few of the dubious arts, doesn't he?
So he gets into that and he starts making some money. He then goes on a bit of a trip to Italy, goes to Rome and various places. Yeah. This was more for fun, I think. He ends up in Naples in 1882 and he receives some unwanted attention from the Italian police.
Okay.
He doesn't go into why.
Is it warranted?
With him, it would undoubtedly be warranted.
He's come to their attention somehow.
Doubt. He cheats at cards. He cheats at billiards. He gets in debt.
He's loose with their women folk.
Yeah. He's always in debt. He borrows money and never pays it back.
Sure.
So while he was being chased by the Italian police in Naples, in amazing coincidence, he decides at this point off the top of his head, and even in his own book he says this, he suddenly develops an instant but deep passion to travel to Australia because he's standing at the docks and he goes, where's that boat going? And they go, Australia. And he goes, I'm on. So he jumps on the boat to Australia.
Now, I'm going to stop you here. How much money can he lose on a trip to Australia? This has got to be the longest journey.
I know.
He would lose his stuff, win it back, lose it.
This one we don't know. He doesn't go into this much, and there's not a lot of. But there are some of his other trips back to London, which we'll get to. So, but he's suddenly in the 1882. He shows up, and he lands in Adelaide.
Adelaide, of all
May
places.
30th, 1882.
I thought he said he hates boredom. Why would he go to Adelaide?
Well, he doesn't stay in Adelaide long. He arrives and decides, he doesn't go into why, but he says it was to honour like a family member, but I think he starts calling himself Robert Sutton. Now, when someone says I'm just changing my name after fleeing from Italy
going
to Adelaide, so he becomes Robert Sutton for a while. He starts working as a bookmaker on behalf of a man called Wynnum, who is funding the operation.
Right.
So Siva's taking bets, running the book. He's taking money. Before long, though, within a month or so, Wynnum accuses Siva of faking accounts, which sees Siva suddenly develop a passion to go to Melbourne. So he goes to Melbourne. And in Melbourne, this is where he changes betting in Australia and sets out the way betting has happened. Well, before the internet, bookies operate in Australia for like the next 100 years.
So how does he do this? What's his plan?
So he shows up in it, and he's got a letter of introduction from someone in Adelaide to Captain Standish, Frederick Standish, who's the chairman of the VRC, who's the guy that was also the Commissioner of Police and founded the Melbourne Cup.
Okay.
Who we have to do a podcast on. He is.
You've told me about this guy.
Of this guy, and we might do that around the Melbourne Cup. We might put one out of him. So he's got this letter of introduction. So he takes it to him, and he gets this introduction, and he gets made a bookie. And he's noticed in Adelaide, bookies have only become legal in Victoria and most of Australia in the year beforehand.
Yep.
So he notices that when you bet on tracks in Australia at this period, what happens is bookies just they wander the course. There's nothing that says they're a bookie. And they go up to people and they say, do you want to put a bet on? Because it had been illegal, but even now it is legal. That's how they do it. They want to put a bet on and they're like, yeah, and then there's no cash changing hands. Right. It's all written in a book.
Written down, yeah.
And then you have to find the bookie after. It's all a bit of a pain.
Tell me about it.
They tend to go and look for people who look like, rubes that have come down from the country or something, and it's all a terrible experience. And he thinks this is not really a great way of doing this. And it's also, it was seen as like it wasn't a great thing to be a bookie. So they were kind of it was all done a bit under the table.
Sure.
Siva has no concerns about public opinion. And so what he does, instead of wandering the course-seeking customers, he sets up a stand with a board with the odds. He has a clerk to take the money.
Here I am.
So he takes cash and he pays out straight after the race, where the other bookies settle often a couple of days later. There's a settling hotel where they all go and settle it. But he says straight away after, you come back with your chit that we've written for you, we'll give you the cash straight away. So he stands up in front of everyone and because he's got the theatrical acting thing, he starts going, who wants to bet? And he says, you, sir, you look like and he entertains the crowd because he's been an actor. He
draws a crowd.
Yeah, he draws a huge crowd. He's charismatic. So he starts taking, in the first time at Flemington, he takes about 90% of the action on the day.
Wow.
And everyone's
Any
like,
trouble from
what
the
is
law?
this go? No, because it's suddenly now legal. All the other bookies hate his guts.
And they haven't cottoned on to the idea that you don't have to sneak around anymore.
Yeah, they don't have to. And so they all start doing that. So he starts doing this and they all are like absolutely love it. He's got the kit bag that you saw bookies had. He introduced that.
Famous bookie bag.
Backy bag. He introduces that.
I always wanted to
That's
go
where-
out one night, and see a bunch of bookies dancing in a nightclub around a bookie bag. You know like girls dance around a
Yeah,
handbag.
the handbag.
How good would that be?
So he's done all this, and so he's making it a theatrical art, right? And so it dominates this style that he sets up. They
Yeah.
all adopt it, and it becomes the dominant style for the
Well,
next
that's
100
impressive,
years, right?
That is genuinely a revolutionary idea.
So Melbourne City newspaper is still recording his exploits 50 years later. They're still
Yeah.
writing articles about how much he was. In his first year at Flemington, he made £70,000 with the help of 3 clerks and in biggest bookmaker in Australia. The punters were so happy, they loved him because he paid out straight away.
Yeah.
They all called him Good Old Bob because he now was back to being, he was Robert Sutton and Siva.
Oh, Bob Sutton.
And so they all covered him. And then he also becomes a bit of a celebrity because of this, but also because he gives, while living in Melbourne, he is often up in Sydney too, and he gives lots and lots of reasons for the newspapers to write about him.
Sure.
So in 1882, he goes to this sort of market and meets a stallholder by the name of Amy Everett, and he has a whirlwind romance and marries her. The marriage lasts 4 years, and then she divorces him on the grounds of cruelty, desertion, and adultery.
That's what it's got on his Tinder profile.
He doesn't really argue it because the charge of adultery is not that hard to believe. By his own count, in his lifetime, he produced 17 illegitimate children.
Wow.
That's
There
a
you
lot.
go. That's by his own count.
That's
I
by his own
reckon.
count. They're the illegitimate ones. He has some other children that
Fantastic.
weren't illegitimate too. So this is the
I
talk.
wonder he's always on the move.
Yeah, this is right. So this is the talk of the town. But it wasn't the only thing they were all talking about him. So it started off one day, what sort of led to his downfall in Melbourne.
Yes.
It was a pigeon shoot conducted by the Melbourne Gun Club.
Okay.
So it's hard to get in trouble at a pigeon shoot.
I would have thought so.
Siva starts betting on who could shoot the most pigeons, right? Because
Well, it's allowed, isn't it?
With a guy called Lord Deerhurst, who's the aide de camp to the Governor of Victoria.
Yep.
So quite a powerful man. It comes time to settle the bet. An argument ensues between the two. In Siva's versions of events, it's all like he was wrong, the guy didn't pay up the money and all that.
Yes.
But, you can't believe a word he says, right? But it ends up with them coming to blows at a hotel in the city. And he gets charged with assault. Okay. So he's like, before he has to go to the hearing in 1887, he manages to take a short trip home to London. He does come back for the assault cars, but he goes home. And on the ship over, he meets a Mrs. Armstrong. He's great on the ship journeys, right?
Hey.
She's on the way to London to build a career as an opera singer, and she's travelling with her husband and son. Despite this, they have an affair on the boat.
On the boat.
Miss Armstrong goes on to find great success in London, and she makes a name for herself as Dame Nellie Melba.
What is going on? Now tell me you fact checked this.
Yeah.
This is jeez.
Because she was.
you need to explain
she
who
was
Dame
breaking
Nellie
it.
Melba is
she's
for
one of the
anyone
most
listening
famous opera
overseas.
singers of all time. You know,
She's
so
an
from Australia,
institution in
in
Australia.
Australia, but was huge over in Europe too, and she divorces that husband not long after. They were already on the rocks
Right.
when that all happened. So she had quite an adventurous life, outside of all this. So he's doing that.
Kept that quiet and all the biographies on Dame Nellie
know.
Melba.
He then comes back to Melbourne after this, and he's sentenced to 14 days jail for the assault on Lord Deerhurst.
Good on him for coming back though.
I think he kind of had to
He
because
had business
business
concerns.
things and that. He appeals the sentence, and he wins the appeal. It's quashed. It's not assault.
So he doesn't go to jail.
It's seen as they were both just roughhousing, and it was both of the men's problem. But by this point, he's been expelled by the Melbourne Gun Club and the Victorian Club, which is where the bookies settle their bets. So if you're not part of that, it's very hard to be a bookmaker. And even though he wins the appeal, Deerhurst is powerful enough to make sure he doesn't get his bookmaking license back. He's also at this point got this absolute reputation for cheating at cards, billiards and everything. So he decides this is a good time probably to head back to London.
So he's not well liked in certain circles.
He's well liked by the public and he's well liked with a lot of people, but anyone he gets into any money sort of like he's a cad, you know, like
We know those guys.
You know these guys. Fun.
How
As
many-
long as you're not involved with them in any meaningful way.
There's many cads these days. Cads were of the era, weren't they?
But you know how someone who's really nice can be incredibly boring? And sometimes someone who's not that nice can be incredibly good fun, as long as you're not
On the receiving end.
or in business with them, or you know what I mean? Like,
Yes, I do.
often these guys are incredibly fun.
I can
And
name
then,
you 5. 2 of them are in this room. Yes, fire away.
so he goes back to London and he straight away starts betting. He becomes famous in the press once again. Everywhere he goes for big betting plunges, and he sets up a dodgy betting syndicate that has numerous fake names and all this sort of stuff he does.
To manipulate odds.
Manipulate odds, take bets from people, and then mysteriously they never see their money again. Like, he's doing everything. He also realises he needs more money, so he funds it by marrying Lady Mabel Emily Louisa Brudenell Bruce. She's the sister of the Marquis of Aylesbury. So he marries into big money.
Wow.
He met Lady Mabel. They were both engaged to other people.
Doesn't seem to be an impediment to him in
Nothing
any
is an
way.
impediment.
He's lawless, this guy.
Yeah, it's lawless. It's 2 days before Lady Mabel was due to wed, and he talks her out of marrying this guy
Oh, my God.
and marry him, and they both call off their respective engagements and marry each other in 1892. Lady Mabel announces she jilted Lieutenant Crosby from marriage. She said no to him because he was asking that the bulk of her fortune should be settled on him, and she didn't want that. And she was worried about going bankrupt. And she also said, issued a writ against the lieutenant for £25 for money she lent him from the last Ascot race meeting. So she's like, I didn't marry that guy on these grounds. Little does she know,
she's pulled the wrong rein
she's
here.
pulled the absolute wrong rein, because I tell you what, by the end, it's not going to work out. So despite Lady Mabel paying him all this money and giving him all that, by 1894, so just 2 years into their marriage, he's already been declared in those 3 times in the 2 years they're married first.
He's declared what?
Bankruptcy.
Oh, bankrupt.
3 times.
Wow. Okay.
So he's constantly losing money. She keeps bailing him out, and he begins using her money to buy racehorses. And funnily enough, because he's been at the track so much, he's actually quite good at picking. Yeah, so they all a lot of them become champions, you know, and does quite well. Amazingly, you'll be shocked, the marriage didn't last, despite the very strong...
Shame.
Yeah, I knew you'd be
I
shocked.
thought they were bonded for life, those two.
Yeah,
They're like childhood sweethearts. You know?
it makes you question romance, doesn't it?
It's like an early version of The Notebook. What it is. All right, keep going.
So, lady, they split up at this point, and in 1898. So he's been with her 6 months. He leaves her with a son, a daughter, and completely broke.
Dear, he's like a wrecking machine.
Oh,
it's just carnage.
He somehow,
and then he's way to check, please. He's out of there.
yeah, he's out, and then somehow he then moves in 1898 after this divorce to a place called Toddington Park, which is a big estate.
Yes.
Like you know, often there's a big stately home be called Toddington Park, and then
Okay,
there's a
have you
village
made
near
that
there.
up?
No, and then it's like
Toddington Park sounds
yeah,
like
Toddington
very
Park. You can
hoity-toity.
Google this. It's an amazing house. And so you know the local manor, the town and everything would serve the local manor. He was in this big manor, right, to the point where
Toddington.
Toddington Park. So he says he likes it. Then the village remember him very fondly to this day
Do they?
because he in the grounds and he puts in a top quality cricket pitch, and he hires the groundsman of Lords to build it. This is after
How does he do this?
money just is money to him is just it comes in, it goes out, he gets it, it's just this constant, it's to be spent. So he's got the groundsman of Lords to build him a cricket pitch, and then he holds annual cricket matches there. He pays the top players to come. WG Grace comes
No.
and brings a WG Grace 12 to play a random one. He says William Billy Murdoch, who was the Australian captain when the Ashes were born, he comes and plays there.
Of course he does.
So they're all there, WGA. So this is the kind of guy he is. Like,
Is he
just
betting on this?
Yeah,
is he
betting.
fixing this? Is there
He's doing it all,
a
right?
plunge?
So he moves back to London at one point and a young Winston
How's
Churchill
he funding himself at this point?
betting plunges, but a whole bunch of, they don't go into all the data, but
He's got, like,
he's
mentors
cheating
and
at
stuff.
cards. He's got good horses, but he's also cheating at cards, fixing odds, gambling a lot,
He's got a number of rackets.
rackets. He borrows money, doesn't return it. It's like it all catches up over time, but he gets away with it.
I bet you he owes W.G. Grace money.
Oh,
Still
yeah,
to this
yeah,
day.
Still to this day. And we get into some other exciting ways he makes money too, but he's just constantly doing this. So he's like, he's having these cricket games. So he leaves people in his wake. He has money no matter what, right? His success on the track continues. His most notable horse, Sceptre, won 4 of the 5 English classics in 1902. Missed out on the Derby. So the Derby...
Well, that should be enough to bankroll you
that's
forever.
right. The Derby, the Oaks, the 1,000 guineas, the St. Ledger, and the 2,000 guineas. They're the big 5. He wins all of them but the Derby. But it doesn't matter how much money he makes. He loses because he's hiring the guy from Lords to build him a cricket pitch in his backyard.
It's there to be spent.
That's there to be spent.
He's got no nest egg, this guy.
Do
He's not saving for a rainy day. Yeah. He's got it, and it's going.
This is the guy that got into crypto day one.
They're the first man in history to make it rain.
Yeah. So the other thing, while he's in London for a bit, he actually rents a house off a young Winston Churchill who's in East Africa. He's over in East Africa because Churchill was a big war correspondent. So he's
I'm going to tell you this. Yeah. I bet you he owes Winston Churchill money. I bet you to this day.
So he's living in one of Winston Churchill's houses in London. So he's like, this is the guy he is, right? He's just at the centre of everything. Everything's happening. In 1904, he's in so much financial trouble, despite just winning.
Winston Churchill was born at Blenheim Palace.
Yeah, so this was one of his London places. So
I've been to Blenheim Palace.
Have you? What's it like?
Oh, it's unbelievable. So just a quick history lesson for not the English.
Is it as good as Tottenham Park?
Talk amongst yourselves. But for anyone in Australia, no. So it was for the first Duke of Marlborough. Because he'd done excellently in war.
Yeah,
what do you want?
His grandfather.
So here we go. So we've got this massive estate, and it's handed down hereditarily. But it's got to the point where I think it's like the 9th Duke of Marlborough is a bit of a dick. And I go out to Blenheim Palace on this day, and it's not open.
Yeah.
And I go there, mate, any chance I can have a poke around? I heard a bit about this joint. And they go, no.
This joint?
Yes, no, you can't because we're not open today. I said, how's it going? He goes, there's a bit of strife. This is about 20 years ago. There's a bit of strife. I go, with who? He goes, the 9th Duke of Marlborough is really, he's no good, this kid. He's a bum. They go, we're trying to change the law to take it off him because...
Who's this guy talking to?
He's like the groundsman or like I don't know, he's got a rake or something. Anyway, at the time he's saying this guy's a bum, all you see is this puff of cloud of dust on the horizon.
Yeah.
And this car, like a Lamborghini, comes flying across the bridge, across the lake.
Yeah.
Pulls up out the front of the palace, music, doof music going, doors open, guy falls out, fumbles round.
It's like Wolf of Wall Street.
Engine is still on, guy fumbling around for keys, opens front door of palace and shuts it. The crazy groundsman. I rest my case. And that happened in front of me, unfolded live.
That's almost better than you getting a tour. Do you know what I mean?
I got the tour. I got the inside running on what was happening.
This is how it really works.
So there you go.
Well, he sounds like what Siva probably was
It's
like,
probably
but it would have been a
related to
horse.
Siva. It's probably Siva's great grandson, whatever it is.
So
True story.
It's because these houses are amazing. So he's broke again in 1904. He's so broke he has to sell Sceptre, his champion racehorse, for £25,000 just to pay.
Yeah.
Off. So he has these moments where he does pay everyone back. Not usually he doesn't, but every now and then when he manages to sell
Religiously,
something.
or is it just guys he knows or likes? Or?
When he needs to. So in this case he needed to. So he sells. He has something to sell to pay it off. So he sells Sceptre, £25,000. gets the money, goes straight away. That same year, Siva brings a libel charge against a guy, Sir James Duke, which Duke has accused him of being a thief, a card cheat, and a murderer.
How dare he?
Because there'd been rumours
Murderer I'll live with.
Well, yeah.
But card thief.
There'd been rumours that card players who upset Siva fell off balconies. Now, there's no evidence of this anywhere, but that was so. So he's.
I just love the idea that you've besmirched his reputation.
Yeah, well,
how dare you? I need to defend my honour.
Well, so Siva sues him for libel, and they go to court, and the jury finds Sir Duke had not committed any libel because it was all true. Yeah.
Sorry, we love you, Siva, but we can't help you, mate.
So he has to pay all the costs for the failed case.
Oh, there we go. He's got to sell something else now.
Yeah, that's right. So he's like, so this is sort of where he is. So Siva had also at this time started a racing paper called The Winning Post, which he mainly used to settle scores in the racing world and occasionally blackmail people.
What?
So there was a guy called Jack Joel who was the nephew, and this is in 1908, he was the nephew of Barney Bonato, who was
He sounds like a character.
Yeah, he was Cecil Rhodes' major competitor in the diamond markets in South Africa. Bonkers
Barney
rich.
Bonato.
Yeah, billionaires, like the billionaires, the Bill Gates of their days, Mark Zuckerberg's of their Titan. So, and Rhodes was obviously, Cecil Rhodes is obviously the big one, but this was his main rival.
Bonato.
Huge amounts of money, right? Jack Joel was the nephew of Barney Bonato, and basically Siva, and this is partly how Siva funds himself, says, I'm going to run a bunch of stories against you in my paper unless you give me £25,000.
Okay. That's pretty much straight out extortion.
Straight out extortion, right? And he says, he'd already published some damage articles before. One of them, he'd printed a picture of a picture of this nephew, Jack Jones, in between two murderers. So it wasn't subtle, kind of sort of thing. What happens there is Jack Joel, instead of, and he's part of this big, powerful family, he doesn't pay, he goes straight to Scotland Yard and says, I've been blackmailed. So this case becomes this celebrity case it's written up in the New York Times.
Wow.
This is how big it is, like huge.
Yeah.
Right? So sort of like, the big cases like the Simpson case and stuff like that. It was like that big. And so
Johnny Depp, Amber Heard, that kind of
that
thing.
sort of stuff. So it's in the Old Bailey. Siva's relying on his charm to sway the crowd.
Yes. Playing to the jury.
Yeah, he has a great lawyer who cross-examines Jack Joel and makes him cry in the cross-examination. And the combination of this and Siva's charm, he wins the acquittal.
Oh, my God.
Which people are like, they still, if you Google this case in legal things, it's like it's known as one of the great cross-examinations of all time. But also, like, how did anyone lose the? How did
because
Jack Joel
justice
lose
is not blind.
Yeah.
You can see him bawling, and the other guy looking great.
He's acquitted. The crowd in the courtroom break into cheers. The Lord Chief Justice Alveston pronounced the scene disgraceful, and the London Times writes an editorial saying we are rapidly becoming the most emotional of people, and they're all scathing of it. But he's a celebrity. So this makes him a folk hero. He's sort of becoming a folk hero as well. Things don't go so well. March 1920, a guy called Richard Wootton, who's an Australian-born horse trainer, who's over in London, and with a fair bit of success, he brought a libel case against Siva because Siva had used the Winning Post to accuse Wootton of being a mastermind of race fixing, which is the kettle calling the pot black.
This is unbelievable.
So another high-profile trial kicks off. And Siva's so popular with the public, despite like his history and everyone, they don't care, that huge crowds escort him to the Old Bailey for each 6 days of the trial, cheering good old Bob, like a soccer crowd taking him to the thing. It's that big. It's a huge willing trial where there's petty insults regularly being thrown between Siva and Wootton. Yeah. At one stage, Siva questioned Wootton about the credentials of one of his associates, and Wootton replied, No, he's just an ordinary, honest citizen. And Siva said, not such a blackguard as I am. And he said, well, I wouldn't contradict you on that. Then 3 days of this, Justin Darling declared in frustration, I shall never get to the bottom of the wickedness in this world. This is the judge. To which Wotton's replier interjected, I'm sure Mr. Siva will help you, your lordship. So he's found guilty.
Very British.
Yeah, he's found guilty of libel at this point, and the ruling once again leaves him bankrupt for about the 18th time. He's also branded in the media at this point as a cheat. It's revealed he was a cheat at cards and billiards in Australia, England, and Monte Carlo.
Monte Carlo.
Now, deterred by all this, he still manages to get bankrupt one more time in 1932. So
I
even
think he
after
likes it.
all
I
this,
think he gets like everyone's an adventure. So then he gets bankrupt. He picks himself up, dusts himself off.
to him,
and he goes, "What?
It
What are we
doesn't
doing now?"
affect him, right? Like the normal people would feel shame, or to him, it's you make your money, you lose it, you make it, you lose it, and you have fun doing it.
Fantastic.
You don't care if everyone else.
You're not going to die wondering.
He's never. He also wrote several books. His book, an unreliable autobiography from 1960, which is free online to read in PDF form and everything, is hilarious. He wrote a volume of travel essays.
Did it sell well?
It sold okay. It's so unreliable that, you know, he wrote 2 other books, one of travel essays and a couple of novels as well. So he wrote a fair bit of stuff. He died in the 8th of October 1939 at his home in Ifield Wood, Sussex.
Just in time to dodge the war.
Just dodged the get out of the war. He was 79, which for the life he lived is amazing. So much so that when he died, though, the New York Times printed a huge obituary for him.
Oh, wow.
So this is how big he was at the time. It said, Robert Standish Sievier, whose career as a racehorse owner, gambler and society man of the Victorian and Edwardian days made him one of the most colourful personalities of his time, died today in his Sussex cottage at the age of 79. The man who was once almost a millionaire died penniless, broken by the horse racing that made him. So this is...
Wow.
So he was ground zero for what was the colourful racing identity in Australia.
I love it.
And
England.
And one of the larger-than-life characters that you just occasionally get thrown up.
I need a copy of the autobiography. That is bedside reading for me. That'll be my 50 Shades of Grey for this week. Thank you once again, Titus O'Reilly.
We're on all the socials. Follow us there. If you'd like to leave a review on iTunes, it helps us out. And if you've got an idea for a story you'd like us to do or got some feedback, send an email to us. We're even on the electronic mail. It's info@sportsbazaar.com. See you next week.
Cheers.